Hello, good morning. Another Monday has rolled around. The weeks are flying in lockdown, and all the days they just merge into one. I regret that I haven't lost any weight, and I think I've actually put a little bit more on again. I'm the heaviest I've been in my life, and I must stop eating and I must stop thinking about food, and it's been a domestic goddess. It's no good for you at all, but there we are. I've been busy stitching on this sampler. I'm really pleased how she's coming together. Stitching these girls, it was just, I love the movement in them, and they're joyous, they're celebrating something, they're having fun, and it really lifted my mood when I was stitching them. I'm sorry, I've got so many threads on the go here, they're hanging everywhere. This sampler is delightful. Anyway, so that's her. In my last but one video, we talked about some linen, and I forgot to show you another linen by Legacy Linens, and that's Wayfarer's Cloak, and this is 38 count. And for you to get some sort of perspective on that linen, this is the Wild Honey. Isn't that lovely? And 38 count, that's quite a nice sort of count, just to sort of move off 36. Anyway, another lovely linen from Legacy. The sampler I've got here, a lot of you will recognise. It's Elizabeth Furnace, and Elizabeth is a sampler that we released quite a long time ago. Boomer stitched the model, and she hangs at the attic needleworks. If ever you go into the attic, you will see Elizabeth Furnace hanging there. She's a really, really pretty sampler. So here is the original. It's a delightful sampler. There's so much to catch the eye, and she put a lot into her sampler. Now, I have talked about Elizabeth before. There is a video that I did a few years ago, but I'm revisiting Elizabeth today because another sampler has recently come into my collection, and that is Mary Ann Ragg, R-A-G-G. And it was stitched, or she stitched her sampler in 1826, age 12. So she stitched this sampler 10 years before Elizabeth stitched her sampler. But you can see that there are similarities between the samplers. Now, Mary Ann chose a honeysuckle border that runs up the two sides and the top, just as Elizabeth's sampler did. She chose the same undulating little cartouche that Elizabeth did. And before we get to the house, you've got these hearts, which are the same. They're on, sorry, there's not enough room for three of us here. They're here. And then you have these trees with the birds. And then you have the house and the pastoral scene below with, on this one, two shepherds. On Elizabeth, it's a shepherd and shepherdess. And these are clearly stitched in the same school. And I think this is a good example to, you can see that these were obviously taught by the same needlework teacher, but the girls had an element of freedom when they came to stitch their own sampler. They chose verses that meant something to them, and they obviously had a choice of border because we have carnations on Elizabeth's and we have honeysuckle on Mary Ann's. I love making connections between samplers. Very, very pretty. You can see that's the same house. Now, when we reproduced Elizabeth and we were researching Elizabeth, there were a lot of Elizabeth furnaces and we weren't quite sure which was the right one. And after she was released, another needleworker contacted me and said she's very similar to another sampler that she knew of. And then by using the two girls' names, we found out more about the samplers. I have written, or I did write quite some time ago, a blog post about this. So I'm going to just read you from the blog post, because my brain these days, I can't remember lots of facts just to roll off my head. Shortly after Elizabeth's chart was released, we learnt of other samplers that shared some or all of her motifs. The distinctive apple tree and the imposing red house with its towering cedars either side, the patchwork pasture, the shepherd and shepherdess, and those funky striped geese. And there are her funky striped geese. I love those. They're so, so pretty. A sampler with an almost identical apple tree recorded the name of the school where it had been stitched, Darnall School, which we traced to the township of Attercliffe, Darnall in Sheffield. And Sheffield is in Yorkshire, England. We found the sampler's maker through the 1814 census, living in Leadmill Row, Sheffield, a short distance from the school. And when we focused on the Sheffield area, researching other girls who had stitched similar samplers, we found 5 girls who lived within close proximity of each other. As further samplers have come to light, we have traced even more girls living in the same area. But most importantly, we found our Elizabeth. Now, I'm not going to read all of it to you because I'm sure it may not be of interest to everybody, but you can go on to the Hands Across the Sea Samplers website, put the search word Sheffield in, and you will get to this blog post. Now, I think that if we research Mary Ann Ragg, which I haven't had a chance to do yet, I'm sure that we will find her in Sheffield. So I just love making those connections between samplers. And I'm wondering now whether Mary Ann ought to be reproduced, and I'd be very interested to know whether you would like to stitch Mary Ann. Her verse is, see the kind shepherd Jesus stands with all engaging charms. Mark how he calls the tender lambs and folds them in his arms. I think that's such a sweet little verse. Very, very sweet. The verse on this one is stitched over 1, but the rest of the sampler is over 2. I love a red house sampler, and I like pastoral scenes in samplers as well. I think she should be reproduced, and I'd be interested to know what you think as well. Anyway, I've had a few requests to see the quilts that I'm showing on the chairs. So just before I sign off, let's just take this off and we'll put her over there. And this is the quilt that's on the chair. I was a quilter when I had time to quilt. Since Hands Across the Sea Samplers have started, I don't seem to have time to quilt at all. I love a pliqué work on quilts. So that's the quilt that's on the chair. A quilt is a lovely thing to have in your home. They're so useful. I love sort of snuggling up on the sofa under a quilt. So anyway, righty-ho. It's time for me to get on and do some housework. Back to being a domestic goddess. I look forward to hearing from you whether you would like to stitch Marianne, and you may also want to stitch Elizabeth Furness as well. She's a pretty magnificent sampler. Anyway, until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and bye-zy-bye.